Welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. A locked room, a vanishing heiress, and a family filled with secrets. When Lady Eleanor Whitcombe disappears without a trace, Hercule Poirot's sharp mind uncovers a plot deeper than anyone imagined. Who can be trusted in a house where greed hides behind every smile? The truth awaits, but only if you dare to follow the trail. Chapter 1. The Silent Manor. The evening fog rolled thick across the countryside, shrouding Greystone Manor in a veil of mystery. The grand Victorian estate stood in silence, its tall windows reflecting the pale glow of a waning moon. Not a sound stirred, save for the faint rustle of ivy clinging to its ancient stone walls. Inside, the great house breathed with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural, like a stage awaiting its players. Lady Eleanor Whitcombe, the sole heiress to her late father's fortune, was said to be preparing for the evening's engagement celebration. Yet her room remained eerily quiet. The long corridors were dimly lit by flickering oil lamps, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. A cold draught whispered through the hallways, carrying with it the faint scent of roses from the garden below, mingled strangely with the acrid trace of smoke. Upstairs, Eleanor's chamber door was closed. The servants, bustling nervously in the kitchen and dining hall, whispered that the young lady had not appeared since early afternoon. On the great dining table, silverware gleamed, candles flickered low, and untouched crystal glasses of champagne awaited the clinking of a toast that never came. When at last her maid ventured timidly to knock, the silence inside seemed heavier than before. There was no answer. The handle turned, yet the door would not yield, locked from within. The maid trembled and whispered prayers under her breath, summoning the butler. Together, they forced their ears against the wood, listening for any sound, a breath, a movement, a sign. But there was nothing. Only silence, thick and impenetrable. At last they forced the door. The room stood empty. The fire had burned low, casting a dull glow over the furniture. On the dressing table, Eleanor's jewellery lay neatly arranged, untouched. Her gown for the evening hung still upon the wardrobe, yet the lady herself was gone. Most curious of all was the faint trail of ashes in the fireplace. A half-burnt letter curled among the embers, its edges glowing faintly before collapsing into dust. The final words, barely legible, seemed to whisper a summons. "Meet me in the rose garden at midnight." The maid shrieked softly, dropping to her knees in fear. The butler crossed himself, his hands shaking. Somewhere in the depths of the house a clock struck 9, its echo rolling through the corridors like the toll of a warning. And thus, in the fog-laden stillness of that night, the mystery began. The heiress had vanished from a locked room, leaving behind only silence, shadows, and a secret invitation written in flames. Chapter 2. Poirot arrives. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the hedgerows as a carriage rattled along the gravel road leading to Greystone Manor. The house loomed like a ghost against the pale September sky, its chimneys breathing faint curls of smoke into the air. All was hushed, yet the silence was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of unease, of whispers left unspoken. From the carriage descended a small, impeccably dressed man. His shoes gleamed despite the damp road, his moustache was trimmed to perfection, and his eyes, keen, sharp and unyielding, seemed to pierce the fog itself. Hercule Poirot had arrived. He stood for a moment, surveying the manor with the precision of an artist inspecting a canvas. His lips curved ever so slightly, as though he found the scene before him not merely tragic, but intriguing. "Ah," he murmured softly, his accent lilting through the morning air. "A house heavy with secrets, and already I feel the threads of disorder. Mais oui, It is here that we shall restore order and balance once more. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Inspector Japp, who had been called from Scotland Yard, greeted Poirot with a mixture of relief and curiosity. "Dash it all, Poirot," he muttered, tugging at his coat. "The girl vanished into thin air." Locked room, no signs of struggle, no ransom note. It's like the devil himself spirited her away. Poirot only raised a brow. He removed his gloves carefully, smoothing them with deliberate care before placing them neatly on the hall table. Then, with a slight bow of his head, he spoke. "Mon cher Japp, there is no devil here, only human hearts, and human hearts are often far more dangerous. Show me, if you please, the chamber of Mademoiselle Whitcombe." As they ascended the grand staircase, Poirot's eyes flickered across every detail. The faint scuff on the polished wood, the maid's anxious glance as she passed, the curtain in the corridor that stirred, though no window was open. Every fragment, no matter how small, lodged itself into his mind with perfect clarity. When at last they reached Eleanor's locked room, Poirot paused on the threshold. The air inside was cold, as though the fire had not been tended since the night before. He walked slowly, his patent leather shoes clicking softly against the floorboards. He touched the dressing table, the untouched jewels, the evening gown still waiting in its place. "Curious," he said quietly. "All is prepared, yet the lady does not appear." It is as though she dressed the room for an audience, and then vanished before the curtain rose. Poirot crouched by the fireplace. With delicate fingers, he lifted the charred remnant of the half-burnt letter. His eyes gleamed. "An assignation. Meet me in the rose garden at midnight. Ah, my dear Eleanor, you trusted someone very much, or feared them enough to obey." Japp shifted uneasily. "Then you think she went of her own will?" Poirot straightened, brushing the ash from his fingertips. He gave a small, knowing smile. "Perhaps, mon ami. But remember, appearances are like smoke. They conceal as much as they reveal. We must tread with care. Somewhere in this house, behind these walls, the truth waits, patient and silent." Outside, the manor clock chimed the hour. Its solemn toll echoed through the corridors, a reminder that time moved forward, though the mystery only deepened. And in that chilling moment, Poirot's eyes narrowed with resolve. The game had begun. Chapter 3. The Family in Shadows. The drawing-room of Greystone Manor was a place of elegance and tradition. Heavy velvet curtains draped the tall windows, a grand chandelier hung above, and a fire burned low in the grate, its flames snapping quietly. Yet beneath the polished veneer, the atmosphere was strained, thick with secrets and suppressed fears. Hercule Poirot stood near the hearth, his small frame reflected in the gleaming marble. He looked at each member of the household in turn, his gaze calm but unyielding. Inspector Japp leaned by the mantelpiece, notebook ready, though he knew Poirot's method was rarely about rapid questioning. It was about watching, waiting, and listening for the cracks in human nature. The family gathered reluctantly. Sir Reginald Whitcombe, Eleanor's uncle, sat stiff-backed in his chair, his cane resting across his knees. His stern face carried the lines of authority, yet his eyes avoided Poirot's steady gaze. He spoke with a clipped tone. "Eleanor was the pride of this house. Her vanishing is intolerable. I demand you find her swiftly." Monsieur Poirot inclined his head, but noted the man's hand gripping the cane too tightly, the slight tremor in his jaw. Lady Margaret Whitcombe, Eleanor's stepmother, entered next. Draped in mourning black, she dabbed delicately at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her voice was sweet, yet trembling. "My poor Eleanor, She was like a daughter to me. Why, only yesterday she confided that she wished for peace, for happiness. I cannot imagine who would wish her harm. Poirot bowed slightly, but observed how the lady's tears came readily, almost rehearsed, and how her gaze flickered toward the willowy figure of Beatrice. Beatrice Whitcombe, the cousin, stood by the window, her silhouette etched against the pale daylight beyond. She was young, graceful, yet there was a hardness to her expression. She spoke with a touch of bitterness. Eleanor had everything, the estate, the fortune, the admiration of all. People adored her and she basked in it. But perhaps, Monsieur Poirot, perfection invites envy, even danger. Her words lingered like a dagger in the air. Poirot's sharp eyes did not miss the curl of her lip, nor the faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted her brooch. And then there was Collins, the butler, loyal, precise, his black suit immaculate. His answers came swiftly, yet his eyes darted from one family member to another as though measuring every word. He swore he had seen nothing, heard nothing unusual, though his hesitation betrayed a hidden weight. Poirot clasped his hands neatly before him, surveying them all. His voice, soft yet commanding, broke the silence. Mesdames, Monsieur, it is curious, is it not? In this house, the Lady Eleanor was surrounded not by strangers, but by those de plus proches, those closest to her. And yet, sometimes it is those nearest to us who carry the deepest shadows. The fire popped loudly in the grate, and all eyes turned nervously toward Poirot. The chandelier above swayed gently, though no wind stirred. The hush deepened, pressing upon them like the very walls of the manor. Poirot smiled faintly, his moustache twitching as he spoke again. The truth, I think, is already here in this room. We must only lift the veil, slowly, gently, with care. And as the clock chimed the quarter hour, each face seemed to darken, each heart to quicken, as if the secrets they held had grown heavier in the presence of Hercule Poirot's relentless gaze. Chapter 4. A locked room. The great corridor leading to Lady Eleanor's chambers was long and silent, lined with portraits of stern Whitcombe ancestors who seemed to watch Poirot's every step. The oil lamps flickered faintly, their glow stretching across the patterned carpets like golden veins. Inspector Japp followed close behind, his boots heavy upon the wooden floor, while Poirot moved with careful, almost reverent precision, his polished shoes tapping softly, as if not to disturb the very secrets of the house. At last they reached the door. Its polished brass handle gleamed faintly in the dim light. Poirot paused, laying a delicate hand upon it, and whispered, "Here, mon ami, is the heart of our little enigma. A locked room, always so theatrical, so very dramatic. One thinks immediately, how could one leave without leaving? But there is always a way. Toujours." The room opened with a groaning hinge, and once again the chamber of Eleanor Whitcombe revealed its emptiness. Yet Poirot did not rush. He stood still for a long moment, his head tilting ever so slightly as his eyes roamed the space. His mind, like a finely tuned clock, ticked quietly, noting every detail. The fire had burned low, only embers remained, and above them the half-burned letter, already noticed the day before, still clung to the grate, its blackened edge curling like a secret reluctant to vanish. Poirot crouched gracefully, lifting it with a pair of tongs, his gaze narrowing. "Meet me in the rose garden at midnight," he murmured softly, reading the faint half-destroyed words. A promise, or perhaps a trap. "Tell me, Inspector, do young ladies in England often burn their love notes?" Japp grunted. "Not unless they've something to hide." Poirot straightened and moved to the balcony doors. They were locked tightly, the latch secure, the glass unbroken. He bent low, running his fingertips along the frame. No scratches, no force. He opened the doors gently and stepped onto the balcony. Below lay the garden, drenched in pale morning light, its rose bushes bowing under the mist. Yet no ladder, no rope, no mark of intrusion presented itself. Poirot returned inside. He tapped the polished floor with the tip of his shoe, listening. No hollow spaces. The windows, too, were intact, curtains drawn but undisturbed. He then inspected the wardrobe, the bed, the dressing table, all meticulously arranged, as though Eleanor had prepared herself for the evening only to vanish midway. On the carpet, Poirot knelt, spotting something faint, hardly more than a whisper of a trace, a thin thread of silk, pale blue, almost invisible against the weave of the rug. He plucked it gently, holding it to the light with a satisfied gleam. "Silk," he whispered, "so delicate, and yet so very telling." Japp leaned closer, puzzled. "And what does that mean?" Poirot only smiled faintly, tucking the thread into a small envelope. "Patience, mon ami. The smallest clue may topple the greatest of lies. Already the room speaks, but softly. We must listen with great care." He turned once more, studying the chamber with that still, piercing gaze. Locked door, locked balcony, no disturbance of the window. Yet the lady is gone. Voila, a paradox. And I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in paradoxes. There is an order here, hidden beneath the chaos. And when one restores order, the truth always steps into the light. The manor clock chimed from the distant hall, its sound slow, deliberate, almost funereal. In that echoing toll, the mystery seemed to deepen, as though the very walls of Greystone whispered of secrets long concealed. Poirot smoothed his moustache, eyes bright with quiet certainty. The game was tightening, and the puzzle, soothing in its challenge, was beginning to reveal its hidden edges. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Garden. The night air at Greystone Manor was cool and fragrant, touched with the lingering perfume of roses. The fog had lifted slightly, leaving behind a silvery mist that clung to the hedges and fountains like a veil. The garden stretched wide beneath the balcony, its winding paths glistening faintly in the moonlight, the stone statues standing watch as silent sentinels of forgotten centuries. Poirot stepped carefully onto the gravel path, his patent shoes crunching softly. Inspector Japp followed with a lantern, its glow throwing long shadows across the flower beds. The garden, though beautiful, seemed almost too still, as though holding its breath. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind through the branches carried with it a faint tension, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. "Here, mon ami," Poirot murmured, gesturing toward the central fountain, its water glimmering like liquid glass. "Is the theatre of Our Lady's disappearance, the letter promised midnight in the rose garden. If she came here, then something—" He paused delicately, interrupted her rendezvous. He bent low beside the fountain, where the earth was softer, damp with evening dew. His keen eyes caught it immediately, a faint impression of carriage wheels pressed into the soil, half hidden beneath fallen petals. He touched the grooves with his fingertips, then smiled faintly. A carriage, yes. It came quietly, swiftly, and left as silently as it arrived. But it left its trace. Nature is often kinder to the detective than man. Japp crouched beside him, frowning. But who would bring a carriage into the garden at midnight? That's madness. Madness? Non, Poirot replied, straightening. Design. Every action is chosen with purpose. Whoever arranged this meeting wished for secrecy and swift escape. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the rose bushes. There, caught upon a thorn, fluttered a scrap of pale fabric. He plucked it delicately, a silk handkerchief, damp with dew, its lace edges torn. He held it beneath the lantern's light, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. Voila, a lady's handkerchief, expensive, embroidered, perhaps dropped in haste, or perhaps torn in struggle. The roses stirred faintly in the breeze, and with them came a low sigh, almost like a whisper. Poirot turned, surveying the shadowy garden as though the very hedges conspired to conceal the truth. "Do you feel it, Inspector?" Poirot asked softly. "The garden speaks, not with words, but with silence. This is where the Lady Eleanor's path ended, or perhaps where another path began." Japp's lantern cast a golden glow upon Poirot's face. His expression was calm, soothing, yet his eyes glittered with intensity. He folded the handkerchief carefully, tucking it away. "Order and method, toujours," he said gently. "One does not lose a young lady, not even in the thickest fog. No, she is here, between the roses, the soil, the silence. Already, the garden whispers her story to us from the manor tower above. The clock tolled midnight. The sound drifted through the mist like the tolling of fate. The roses bowed gently under the weight of dew, and the night deepened its hush. Somewhere, unseen, the truth waited, as fragrant and sharp as the thorns of the Whitcombe roses. Poirot stood still, listening, and in that soothing, suspenseful silence, the mystery of the vanished heiress grew darker, richer, like the garden itself, beautiful yet hiding secrets among its blooms. Chapter 6. The Suitor's Secret. The following afternoon, the sky over Greystone Manor was draped in a pale grey, the kind of weary English daylight that dims colours and softens the world into shadow. Poirot sat in the drawing room, his hands folded neatly, his eyes closed as though in quiet meditation. Inspector Japp stood impatiently by the window, tapping his boot against the floor. At last, the door opened, and Lord Henry Ashcroft was shown in. Tall, handsome, but with a certain heaviness about his face, he looked the very picture of aristocratic poise. Yet beneath that calm exterior flickered nerves that even his fine manners could not conceal. He bowed slightly to Poirot, then took his seat. Poirot opened his eyes and observed the young man for a long, thoughtful moment. His moustache twitched ever so slightly before he spoke in a soothing tone. "Monseigneur Ashcroft, you were to be wed to Mademoiselle Eleanor. You, more than any, must have known her heart. Tell me, what troubles weighed upon her in these days before her disappearance?" Ashcroft's jaw tightened. He looked toward the fire, where the flames curled and licked the wood with a soft crackle. At first he said nothing, but Poirot's silence was patient, pressing without force. Finally Lord Henry spoke, his voice low. "She had doubts, Monsieur Poirot. Doubts about our marriage. Not about affection, I assure you she cared for me. But she had discovered something about her father's fortune." Poirot leaned forward gently, his eyes narrowing with quiet interest. "Discovered something? You must be precise, monsieur. What did she say?" Lord Henry clasped his hands tightly. His knuckles whitened. "She told me she had found a document, hidden in her late father's study, a will or some paper concerning the estate. She said she feared she was not the sole heiress, as she had been led to believe." The words fell into the room like stones into water, sending ripples of tension across the air. Japp straightened at once. "By heaven! If that's true, then this whole house is thick with motive." Poirot, however, remained calm. He tilted his head, watching the young man closely. "And did Mademoiselle Eleanor show you this document?" Ashcroft shook his head, his eyes dark with memory. "No. She only spoke of it briefly. That very night, she said she would confront her family soon. She seemed restless, agitated, and then, his voice faltered, she vanished. For a moment, silence pressed down upon them all. The fire hissed, a log collapsing softly into ash. Poirot observed every twitch of Lord Henry's hands, every tremor in his voice. "Tell me, milord," Poirot said softly, "do you love this lady?" Ashcroft's eyes flickered with emotion, yet his answer came strained, heavy. "I do." But she no longer trusted me. She believed someone close to her wished her gone. Poirot's gaze sharpened, though his voice remained soothing, almost gentle. "And you, mon ami, do you fear she suspected you?" The silence that followed was telling. Ashcroft's lips pressed tight, his shoulders stiffened. At last he said quietly, She may have, yes. And it grieves me beyond words." Poirot leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. His eyes glittered in the firelight. "Ah, suspicion, inheritance, secrecy. A volatile mixture, no? The heart of man is a dangerous thing, Lord Ashcroft. Perhaps even more dangerous than an open flame." The clock on the mantel struck 3, its chimes soft yet heavy with foreboding. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of roses once more. Poirot closed his eyes again for a brief moment, whispering to himself. The fortune, the family, the promise of marriage. And now, a vanished heiress. Order and method, Hercule Poirot. The threads are weaving themselves into a pattern. Soon the picture will appear, and as the firelight flickered against the polished walls of Greystone Manor, the secret of Lord Henry Ashcroft settled upon the house like another shadow, soothing in Poirot's calmness, yet laced with the growing suspense of truths still hidden. Chapter 7. The Butler's Mistake. The afternoon shadows stretched long across the polished floors of Greystone Manor, painting the corridors in shades of gold and grey. Poirot had requested that the household remain at hand, each member available for questioning. It was then that Collins, the butler, was summoned once more. The man entered with his usual stiffness, his black coat immaculate, his white gloves spotless. He bowed slightly, his face calm, as if carved in stone. Yet Poirot, seated in an armchair near the fire, did not miss the faint sheen of sweat upon the man's brow. "Ah, Monsieur Collins," Poirot began gently, smoothing his moustache. "Forgive me, but there are details that trouble me. You are the keeper of this house's order, are you not? You see all, you hear all. Then surely you can enlighten us." Collins swallowed, his Adam's apple rising and falling. "I have already told Inspector Japp everything, sir." Lady Eleanor dined in her chambers, then retired early. She was not seen again. Poirot's eyes gleamed. He leaned forward slightly. "And yet, mon ami, I find myself puzzled. You see, I have it upon good authority that you did see Lady Eleanor after that hour, perhaps in her travelling cloak." The words fell like a thunderclap. Collins froze, his lips parting, his eyes widening in alarm. For a brief second, silence pressed thick upon the room. The fire crackled. The ticking of the mantel clock seemed loud, relentless. Collins stammered, his voice faltering. "No, sir, I did not." Poirot raised a single finger, silencing him. His tone was calm, soothing, yet carried the weight of steel. "Mon cher Collins, when one lies once, one must lie again, and again, until the tower of falsehood collapses. Already I see the cracks. Speak the truth, for it is far lighter to carry than a lie." The butler's gloved hands trembled. His eyes darted toward Lady Margaret, then Beatrice, as though seeking rescue. But no one moved. The silence was merciless. At last, he sighed, his shoulders sagging. Yes, I saw her. It was near midnight. She was cloaked as though ready for travel. She bade me no word, only descended swiftly toward the garden. I feared it was not my place to interfere. Japp slammed his notebook shut. So you did see her leave, and yet you swore otherwise before. Why the devil lie to us? Collins wrung his hands. His voice was low, almost pleading. I was ordered, sir. Ordered to keep silent. I could not betray. His words broke off, choked by fear. Poirot's gaze sharpened, though his voice remained almost kind. To obey an order is one thing, mon ami, but to betray the truth, that is another. And now you have betrayed both. The room fell into a heavy hush. Collins bowed his head, his composure shattered. The faces of the family stiffened, their eyes flickering with unease. For now the silence of the manor carried a new weight. The undeniable proof that Eleanor had indeed left her chamber alive. Poirot rose slowly, his figure small yet commanding. He walked to the window and looked out at the misty garden, the roses swaying gently in the wind. His voice was soft, almost to himself. So, the lady left of her own will, or was persuaded. But who awaited her in the garden? Who held the reins of that midnight carriage? Ah, déjà, the picture sharpens. The clock chimed again, its solemn toll echoing through the hall, and as the sound faded, the mystery deepened, soothing in its rhythm yet tightening in suspense, like a net slowly closing around its prey. Chapter 8. The Portrait and the Will. The evening had settled deep upon Greystone Manor. The rain tapped lightly against the high windows, a gentle rhythm that mingled with the low crackle of the fire. Poirot, ever precise, had requested solitude in the late Lord Whitcombe's study, a room seldom entered, filled with the faint scent of leather and dust, the weight of history pressing down from every shelf. Tall bookcases rose to the ceiling, their spines faded with age. The study's centerpiece was a grand mahogany desk, scattered with papers untouched for years. But Poirot's attention was not on the desk. His sharp eyes, attuned to detail, wandered upward, to the large oil portrait that dominated the far wall. The painting depicted Lord Whitcombe in his prime, standing sternly with cane in hand, eyes watchful as though judging the living even from his gilded frame. Poirot studied it for a long moment, his head tilting slightly. Then with deliberate care he approached, his fingertips brushing the ornate edge of the frame. "Mon ami Japp," he murmured softly. "Do you notice? The dust here is uneven. Someone has touched this painting. And recently." Japp frowned. "A portrait? What of it?" Poirot smiled faintly, his moustache twitching. "When one hides a secret, it is often behind the things most visible, yes. Observe." With surprising strength for his small frame, Poirot pressed gently at the frame's edge. The portrait shifted forward with a muted groan, revealing a hollow space behind the wall. Inside lay a small iron safe, its door concealed by the painting for decades. Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Voila! The stage reveals its trapdoor. With the butler's reluctant assistance, the safe was opened. Within, neatly folded and bound, lay a sheaf of documents. Poirot drew out the foremost, its parchment thick, the ink faded yet legible. He spread it carefully upon the desk. It was a will, signed and sealed by Lord Whitcombe himself. But as Poirot read, the room seemed to grow colder. "This is not the will that was spoken of publicly," Poirot said softly. "No, this is different. Here the estate is divided, half to Eleanor, and half to her cousin, Mademoiselle Beatrice." The words struck like thunder. Japp leaned forward, his eyes wide. Good Lord! That means Eleanor wasn't the sole heiress after all. Then Beatrice, she had as much to gain, and much to lose. Poirot folded the document neatly, placing it back upon the desk. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. "You see, mon ami, money is the great corrupter of hearts. With it, one cousin becomes rival to another, and when rivalry grows fierce, it is but a small step to deception, even to crime." He turned toward the portrait, now looming above them once more. The late Lord Whitcombe tried to be just, to be fair. But in so doing, he planted the seed of discord. And now, that seed has borne poisonous fruit. The fire snapped loudly, startling in the silence. The rain outside fell harder, pattering against the glass like insistent fingers. In that heavy moment, it seemed as though the walls themselves whispered of betrayal. Poirot smoothed his moustache, his voice quiet but certain. "The will changes everything." The disappearance of Eleanor was not merely an act of passion, but one tied to inheritance, to fear of exposure. We are no longer in the Garden of Roses, Jap. We are in the jungle of greed. The clock in the hall tolled once more, a deep and solemn sound. And with each chime the truth seemed to creep closer, soothing in Poirot's calm unravelling, yet laced with the deep suspense of a family secret finally stirring from its long concealment. Chapter 9. The gathering storm. The rain had ceased, but the air within Greystone Manor was heavier than ever, charged with the weight of suspicion. In the great drawing room the household gathered once more. The chandelier above flickered with soft light, casting long shadows across the walls, while the fire burned low, its glow restless, uneasy. Hercule Poirot stood before the hearth, his small frame calm and unhurried, hands folded neatly, moustache perfectly symmetrical, yet his presence filled the room with a quiet power. Inspector Japp lingered nearby, his notebook closed, watching the scene unfold as though knowing the moment of revelation was near. Around them, the family sat in tense silence. Sir Reginald gripped his cane so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Lady Margaret dabbed her eyes once more, though her tears now seemed forced, like a performance grown weary. Beatrice, pale but composed, sat rigidly, her gaze sharp, darting occasionally toward the butler. And Collins, the butler himself, stood in the corner, silent and uneasy, his earlier lie still clinging to him like a stain. Poirot let the silence stretch, soothing yet suffocating, until it pressed upon them all like the walls of a closing room. Then at last, he spoke, softly, with precision. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached the turning of the tide. The disappearance of Lady Eleanor is not a puzzle of chance, nor an act of strangers. None. It is born of this house, of this family, and of the shadows that dwell among you." The words settled like a heavy curtain. Sir Reginald shifted in his chair. Lady Margaret's lace handkerchief trembled in her fingers. Poirot began to pace slowly, each step measured, his voice calm yet piercing. The letter, half burned, lured Eleanor to the rose garden at midnight. The carriage wheels upon the earth, the silk handkerchief torn upon the thorn. These speak not of an accident, but of design. Someone awaited her. Someone close. He paused, turning sharply to face them. His eyes gleamed. And then, the will. The document hidden behind the portrait of Lord Whitcombe. It reveals that Eleanor was not the sole heiress. Half the estate was destined for another. Her cousin, Beatrice. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Though Beatrice remained outwardly calm, her lips pressed tightly. Poirot's gaze rested upon her only a moment before moving on. "Consider, if you please," Poirot continued gently. "The maid who feared to speak, the butler who lied, the suitor who trembled with doubt, the stepmother who wept too readily, and the uncle whose authority masked unease. Each of you carries shadows.
Each of you has a reason, but, he raised a finger, sharp and deliberate, there is but one truth, and it lies not in Eleanor's chamber, but in the garden where she vanished. It is there the final act was played, and it is from there we must unravel the threads. The fire hissed as a log
collapsed into ash, and for a moment the only sound was the ticking of the long case clock. Poirot's gaze swept across them, unhurried, steady, as if weighing each soul in the balance. "The storm, mes amis, is upon us," Poirot whispered. "Tonight the veil shall lift, and then, all shall be revealed." The room seemed to shrink beneath the weight of his words. Each family member sat still, as though carved in stone, yet beneath their calm exteriors beat hearts thick with fear. Outside, the wind rose rustling through the trees, and the roses in the garden bowed once more beneath the night. Inside, the silence pressed tighter, soothing in its rhythm yet coiled with suspense, like the breath before a final revelation. Chapter 10. The truth revealed. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and still. Midnight candles burned low in the drawing room, their flames trembling faintly, as if mirroring the unease that gripped every soul inside Greystone Manor. The family sat tense, their faces pale in the dim glow, while Poirot stood calm and composed before the fire, his small frame commanding the room with quiet certainty. He clasped his hands neatly behind his back, his moustache glinting in the light, and spoke in a soothing, deliberate tone that carried both gentleness and steel. "Mesdames, messieurs, the moment has come. We have wandered through shadows, through half-truths and deceit, but now order will be restored, and the puzzle completed." All eyes fixed upon him. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. Sir Reginald's cane tapped nervously against the floor. Lady Margaret's handkerchief twisted in her fingers. Collins the butler stood stiff, eyes lowered, as though awaiting judgment. Poirot began to pace slowly, each step echoing softly against the polished floor. Lady Eleanor did not vanish by magic, non. She left her chamber alive, wearing her cloak. She went to the rose garden at midnight, summoned by a note. There, a carriage awaited her. That much is certain. He paused, then turned sharply toward Beatrice, his voice still calm but now cutting like a blade. "And who, mes amis, had the greatest reason to lure her there? Who discovered that the hidden will divided the fortune equally, stripping away the dream of inheritance? It was you, Mademoiselle Beatrice." Beatrice stiffened, her lips parting, but no words came. Poirot continued, his tone soothing yet relentless. "You feared exposure. Eleanor, with her honesty, would reveal all. And so, you arranged to silence her. You enlisted the help of Collins, who saw her descend the staircase that night but dared not interfere. A carriage carried her away, not to death but to concealment, in a cottage hidden from the world." Lady Margaret gasped softly, pressing her hand to her mouth. Sir Reginald muttered something under his breath, his eyes narrowing upon his niece. Poirot raised a hand for silence. His eyes glimmered as he spoke the final truth. Eleanor was not killed. She lives. She was hidden away, frightened but unharmed. And it was jealousy and greed, not malice, that guided your hand, Mademoiselle Beatrice. You believed that if Eleanor were absent, discredited, lost, you alone might stand as rightful mistress of Greystone. The hush in the room was absolute. Beatrice's composure broke. Her face paled, her eyes filled with tears. I only wanted what was promised," she whispered. "I never meant her harm." Poirot inclined his head gently, his voice soft but firm. "But harm you caused all the same. For lies and secrecy are poisons, mademoiselle, and they spread swiftly." At that moment Inspector Japp entered with 2 constables, and with them Lady Eleanor herself. pale, shaken, but alive. She leaned upon the arm of a maid, her eyes filled with both relief and sorrow as she looked upon the family gathered before her. A collective gasp filled the room. Lady Margaret wept openly. Sir Reginald turned away, his jaw set hard. Collins bowed his head, his guilt clear. Beatrice sank into her chair, her strength gone. Poirot, ever composed, bowed to Eleanor. "Mademoiselle, you are safe now, and the truth, she is no longer hidden." The clock in the hall struck the hour. Its toll rolled through the manor, steady and final. The storm had broken, the veil lifted, and the order restored. Poirot, smoothing his moustache, looked around the silent room and spoke his last words, gentle and soothing. "Greed clouds the heart, mes amis, but truth, the truth blooms always, like the rose in the garden. Even when hidden, even when crushed, it returns, fragrant, eternal." And with that, the mystery of the vanished Victorian heiress was at last resolved.